What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. Today, we're going to be dissecting the Minnesota Wild's 2022 offseason, but also talking about the upcoming season, the 2022-2023 season, which is going to be interesting today. We have Brett Marshall. He has a podcast of his own called Sound the Foghorn, so you guys could check that out. We're gonna leave the description in the link in the description below. And before we get into this topic of today, we're gonna be mentioning our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Bet99. If you like fantasy hockey, football, or other casino games, please sign up to Bet99. The link is in the description below, and don't forget to use our code, which
Kind of cut out there. But it's Young Guns 1, the code.
Okay. And also our other sponsor, which is the Mind Foundation Canada. They raise funds and awareness to find cures for neurological diseases and disorders. They're currently focused on mental health. You could find their link in the description below. And if you choose to donate, you could do that as well. So, Brett, we're going to be talking about your team today, the Minnesota Wild. It's been, pretty crazy in terms of the trade market. We all know that in terms of free agency, it was kind of quiet. So let's start off with the biggest trade. And we did the same thing with our guests from LA. And that was dissecting the Kevin Fiala trade. But now we're getting a Minnesota Wilds fan's perspective as opposed to an LA fan. I know they're really happy with the trade, but how are you feeling about this?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit bittersweet, right? Kevin Fiala did, everything and more that we could have asked him to when he came here. I think you look at it from, the day they make the trade when they send Mikael Granlund to Nashville for Kevin Fiala. A lot of Wild fans were kind of like, wait, that's it? That's all we got? Like, where's the picks or whatever else? And it, you look back at the trade, and I don't even know what it is now, 3-4 years later, and Fiala was definitely the better player through that stretch. And there were times where our entire offense ran through him. And of course, a career year for him last year, finishing off with 85 points. And, it sucks to see him go, but, with the cap situation the Wild were in, it was, the move that had to be done. And, Kevin Fiala wanted a contract that the Wild and, from sources that I have, not a lot of other teams wanted to pay outside of LA. So the trade made sense there, and in turn, the Wild were able to get, a really high-end defensive prospect in Brock Faber, who is a Minnesotan through and through, played at the U of M from Maple Grove, Minnesota, so a hometown kid who wants to play here and is excited to play here and has a lot of talent, especially as, in the game in the defensive side of the game. So it's really exciting to get him, and I think kind of the piece that will really kind of define this trade that will be kind of what becomes Danilo Yurov. So obviously, the pick the Wild used in the trade was on Liam Ogren, but it allowed the Wild to take a swing on Danilo Yurov, who looks like he has legitimate top 6 upside, potentially top line upside. Another Russian with Kaprizov, potentially a type of player that could get him to extend here longer. And everything we've seen and watched about Yurov so far, we were excited when we drafted him. Everything we've seen so far, we're really excited about him. But again, it just what comes of him, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think will really define what this trade ends up being for the Wild and whether or not they got a good deal. But, now that we've seen what the whole trade looks like, I think we got fair value. And, I wish Kevin all the best. And LA is probably my second favorite team if I'm not evident by the quick jersey over my shoulder. So I'm happy he went to a place that hopefully he can thrive and continue to play well.
And I know when we broke down the trade when it happened, we were, thinking the same thing too. Wow, that's kind of an underwhelming return for a guy like Kevin Fiala, a guy who finished second in points for the Minnesota Wild. We know that there was a lot of rumors concerning him throughout the year, and we all knew, like, is he going to re-sign with them? Is he going to get traded by the deadline, even if they're in a playoff spot? Like, what's the situation with Kevin Fiala? And ultimately, they wait until the offseason to do it, and they kind of use them as their own rental. And I thought that Minnesota literally had a hell of a draft. Yurov, and getting the pick from LA as well. That's 2 first-round picks in the first round, and not only that, you're still a competitive team for years to come. You just finished, in a playoff spot. You just came back from the playoffs, and you have 2 first-round picks in the first round. I think that's kind of unheard of. Usually, a team that's not in the playoffs has more than 1 first-round pick.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing what Bill Guerin and Judd Brackett have been able to do with the Wild's farm system in terms of not having to trade picks while still finding ways to field out competitive teams. I mean, you look at some of the acquisitions, Ryan Hartman, Freddie Goudreau, kind of the breakouts of Marcus Felino, bigger years in the blue line for guys like Jonas Brodin. Like these are guys that are all were vastly underpaid compared to what the market would have paid for crazy numbers. Ryan Hartman, the first line last year, scores 35 goals, has 65 points, and is making like $1.7 million a year. Like that's just crazy. So it's been great cap management and that asset to find players that can click and bet on these guys that other teams have given up on. We're seeing that again now with guys like Tyson Jaws and Sam Steele as well. Given these guys who just haven't found it yet and giving them a shot and doesn't work. But in the meantime, you have NHL players that can fill the gap while they're in this cap crunch, and all the while still continue to build on what some claim is the best prospect system in the NHL. So it's an exciting time. I think we're gonna have to kind of hold tight and kind of get through these buyout years for Parise and Suter. But I think when we come out of it, we're going to have tons of cap space. We're going to have a bunch of young guys rearing and roaring and ready to go. And that's pretty exciting as a Wild fan.
And, it's crazy how Suter and Parise, when they were both signed, the Minnesota Wild at the time were deemed the winners of free agency. And now years later, these two guys that were celebrated are not celebrated anymore. And it's like, because of you guys, now we're in this problem. We lost Kevin Fiala because of you, because we couldn't retain his services. Obviously, there's other reasons why Cam Talbot got traded, and we're going to be discussing that shortly. But, losing a guy like Kevin Fiala, especially at 24 years old, and signing the extension that he did with the LA Kings, did you think that was possible if the Minnesota Wild had cap space, or do you think they were going to trade him regardless?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I know there's always been kind of some beef between Fiala and Dean Evason going back to their times with the Milwaukee Admirals while they were both in the Predators organization. They butted heads a lot, but I think if they did in fact actually have that cap space, I think they would have re-signed him. I mean, if you can't throw Kirill Kaprizov aside, but if you throw his season out from last year, Kevin Fiala would have broken almost every franchise record for a single season last year, but Kaprizov ended up doing it instead. So, I mean, he had a historic season. You'd like to get 24-year-old players on the verge of a breakout. It's always good to have those guys on your roster, but the salary cap is what it is, and the buyouts, even if you didn't have to buy those guys out, you still wouldn't have had the cap space either way. That cap's on the books no matter what. So it was a hard decision, but one that Bill Guerin had to make and he's gonna have to live with. But he's continued to put a good team out there in every year he's been here, and it's one of those things you just kind of got to trust the process and see what happens.
And you mentioned a guy that I know Chris was actually really excited about, and he felt that the Colorado Avalanche gave up on him too early, which is Tyson Jaws. What were your thoughts on him so far? What his time with the Minnesota Wild, and what are you expecting from him for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think my opinions have been neither here nor there, but it's really not a fault of his own, right? I think he's had so far kind of run into the same problem he had in Colorado, and that's just he really hasn't gotten a shot to play with a little bit more skilled players. Most of the time here, he was pitching hold on to the fourth line. We saw him get some brief stints. I think Hartman missed like the last game of the year, Zuccarello, and he was thrown up on the top line with Kaprizov, had a big goal in that game, I think against Calgary in the season finale. I thought there was a couple games during the playoffs where even despite the fourth line role, he was an absolute monster and one of the best players on the ice for the Wild in the playoffs against St. Louis. Has been really good on the penalty kill. Our hope here is that, he maybe gets an elevated look this year. The fan opinion is getting him on the second or third line, whichever you want to call it, with Matt Baldi and likely what will be Marco Rossi. That's our hope. Will it happen? Will Dean Evason take, Freddie Goudreau off that line? Hard to say, but that's our hope. But, another thing we're watching, closely in Minnesota is Dean Evason last year didn't like to go through and tweak lines very much, kind of from day one. So we're wondering if that maybe changes this year, because we're hoping that, how things start the year. Hopefully everything works, but, you got to assume there's going to be line combinations don't work. You're going to have injuries. And we're hoping that Jose is the guy that, they elevate up and give a chance to kind of show what he can do. So.
And
you actually, yeah.
No.
Well, the Tyson Jaws trade I think was an absolute win for Minnesota. I mean, I forgot, who did they give up? I know it was a
Marco
Sturm.
Nico Sturm.
Nico Sturm, yeah, sorry.
And I think he's not even playing in Colorado anymore. If I'm
no,
not
I
mistaken.
believe he signed as a free agent in San Jose.
Yeah, exactly. So like at complete steal, like that's a win automatically, right? Yeah, at least Jost is still on the team. But I think he's gonna have a crazy bounce back. Not crazy, but I mean I think he's gonna have a bounce back season. Third line guaranteed. I don't know about him going on the fourth line again. I really don't. I feel like that would be a waste. But as you were mentioning before about Marco Rossi potentially playing on the third line, he's actually projected to be playing fourth. So I mean I don't know if like maybe they're gonna switch up like you mentioned. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the names here. Goudreau, sorry. I don't know if they're gonna be switching up him, and I know Matthew Baldi is also playing on the third line, and I see him maybe going on the second, and Felino playing on
See,
the
and
third.
that's the problem, right? So many
Like,
guys on Minnesota had career years. So
Mhm.
now we don't know what to expect heading to the season. So do you start off with the lineups that you had last year, even though you're going to have new guys being integrated, like Rossi most likely making the team, and possibly having, Connor Dewar and also Brandon Duhaime, sorry, as well, younger guys. But I think in terms of Tyson Jaws, I think that's a project that Minnesota was willing to take on. And they're a good team in terms of having a balance of youth and veteran presence. And slowly, you could see how the youth is kind of overtaking the veterans on this team. So, and especially with the prospect pool they have, like this team is competitive now, but they're also going to be competitive for years to come. And I think it's very rare to see that right now in the NHL. And I think Bill Guerin has done a fantastic job to keep this team competitive now, but also, when the top prospects are ready, they're gonna have guys like Kirill Kaprizov like entering his prime. You're gonna have Joel Eriksson Ek entering his prime, and hopefully Matt Boldy, follows, and Marco Rossi as well. But I've never seen a team built this way before, and I think it's so exciting to see, and it's so refreshing, I would say, as well.
Yeah, it's really unique how they've built out the roster. And this year, I think will be interesting from a construction standpoint because there are a lot of guys that probably can play up and down the lineup. They have the Grief Squad, the line of Greenway, Eriksson, Felino, which has consistently been one of the best shutdown lines in hockey for basically since they've been assembled about 2.5 years ago. In terms of their expected goals against, actual goals against, their goal differential, like they're one of the best lines in hockey when they're all healthy. But there's going to be a spot on that line to start the year, as Jordan Greenway will likely miss probably a couple weeks for sure to start the year with an injury. So that spot's open. It could be another young player in Adam Beckman who could fill that role. It could be a newcomer in Sam Steele. Jost, I believe, had some time on that line during a Greenway injury last year. Didn't look great in it. But is that a spot for him? Could they bump Freddie Gaudreau to the wing? Could they elevate a Connor Dewar or a Brandon Duhaime? Like, there's tons of options there, which is a great problem to have. If a Connor Dewar or a Sam Steele or someone's your 13th forward when the roster is healthy, I think that's a pretty good problem to have. It still probably lacks a little bit of that high end talent outside of Kaprizov, but much like last year, we have to have guys step up. Guys be impact players, guys like Hartman having career years, guys like Marcus Felino continuing to support a insane, shooting percentage, different things like that. Matt Bowley needing to take another step forward and, maybe help drive that line and, be not only a teammate, but also maybe a mentor to a guy in Marco Rossi who, has come a long way from being near death with COVID complications and now, looking to make his NHL debut and be a full-time player. So it's an exciting time for sure.
And
actually,
I think, yes, go ahead, Chris.
well, I was gonna ask him a question about because like we were talking about everybody, most of the guys on this team having career years, and one of them in particular that I'm looking at is Matt Zuccarello, being 35 years old, and it was his first time ever that he passed 60 points. He actually finished with 79, I believe. I mean, with his age, do you see him even playing on the first line still, and or even getting close to at least somewhere like last season's production?
You know what? I do, because I think the chemistry that he has with Kirill Kaprizov is unmatched. I mean, they tried Kaprizov with all kinds of people throughout his rookie year and even at the start of last year. But it was when Kaprizov and Zuccarello were both healthy, both playing together, that he really took off. When Zuccarello came to Minnesota, he was, just been traded out of New York. He had gotten hurt in Dallas. He was still kind of working through an injury. And last year was kind of the first year he played a season fully healthy. And Kaprizov, like him and Kaprizov, just think the game the same way. They find each other in open ice. Like if there was one guarantee I have about the roster for the whole year, it's like barring some epic collapse of their chemistry, the only thing I'm certain of is that those two will be on the ice together almost every time one of them's on the ice, the other one will be there. They just have chemistry. I think Zuccarello has served a very good mentor to Kaprizov. They refer to each other in Russian as like brothers, which I think is super cool. And I think, it's chemistry like that you can't build. Like you can't coach it. It's, you have your Ovechkin and your Backstroms. You have so many of those things that just work. You can't always explain it, but they just work. And I think that's what those two kind of have. And can he replicate a career year? It'd be awesome if he could. But I don't see like a major fall off by any means. I mean, Kaprizov is still going to be 25 this year. Like that's, as long as Zuccarello can continue to get him the puck, I'm not too worried about it.
But, the Minnesota Wild are not strangers in terms of taking on projects. They brought in Ryan Hartman. They also brought in Frederick Goudreau. And these guys, panned out to be better when what they were expected. They surpassed their ceiling essentially because, they kind of fell out with their previous teams. So it's not a surprise that they take on a guy like Sam Steele and having Tyson Jaws being added to the roster after the deadline last year, because it's like, if we were able to do this again, who says we can't replicate that again? And I think they kind of want to adapt that identity essentially, where they could take players that, they have potential, but it's untapped potential. And once they come to the Wild, they're able to find their game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing the Wild will focus on is finding where these guys fit, right? Hartman for the longest time was kind of pigeonholed into this fourth line role. He was a really good defensive player, and that last year we saw a total shift. He was one of the highest volume shooters on the team. His expected goals for percentage went through the roof. He really complimented Kaprizov and Zuccarello in the way that, like, I'm just going to stay in the middle of the ice. I'm going to have my stick ready. If I get a pass from him, I'm going to crash the net. I'm going to play a little mean, a little bit tough. And I'm going to, transition from this defensive guy to this offensive guy. And it worked, right? But, that never happens if the Wild management never give him that chance. And they did, and he took it and he ran with it. I think that's the big thing too, is, these guys have the belief of the coaches, the management, their teammates. They've built a culture there that where guys want to play. I mean, people love Bill Guerin, the players love him, the fans love him. Local media likes the guy for how transparent he is. And I think that's it's bred a culture where players, maybe feel more comfortable. Like there isn't all this pressure on them. It's like, hey, we're going to give you this shot here. Go for it. If it doesn't work, we'll try a different spot. We'll find something that works for you.
And the Minnesota Wild are my second favorite team. I think they have the nicest jerseys in the league because green is my favorite color. I know people are probably going to think I'm crazy, but it's more than that. It's the culture that they built. I think in terms of, the hockey city, I think Minnesota is one of the most underrated hockey places in the NHL, and I feel like they need a lot more media coverage. I think that's something that that's lacked upon, and I think especially after last season, I think for years to come, they're going to continue to prove to everyone that this is a team that deserves, the same coverage as maybe a team like the Washington Capitals or the Pittsburgh Penguins. And, just looking at how well, their drafting team is, and also their development team, that's obviously attached to that, but also taking on players that they did not draft and turning them to something that, that essentially helps them succeed as a team, that creates those players into important players on this roster. If you would have told me a guy like Marcus Felino would have had such an impact on the Minnesota Wild at some point in his career, I would have laughed. And having 42 points in 74 games, I think that's fantastic. Like, he's outplaying his brother essentially for the longest time, his brother was deemed the better player. And I think at this point in time, Marcus Felino is the better player.
Yeah, and on top of that, he's been an unbelievable leader for this team too, whether it's firing guys up in the locker room, whether it's dropping the gloves when someone gets cheap shotted. He's quickly, I think, become a fan favorite player here just because of the energy he brings. Opening night last year, he goes and throws a Superman punch against a guy from the Winnipeg Jets. Like, that's the kind of player he is. And to see the offense come with that, I mean, the chemistry with Joel Eriksson Ek and Jordan Greenway, that line's fun as heck to watch when they're clicking. And like, if that line's feeling it and they're forechecking you, like no line in the league is getting out of the offensive zone because they can't stop them. They're fun, yeah. And Felino's been a guy that, when we I think that was a Jason Pominville trade that was kind of a weird, we got Pominville from Buffalo, then we kind of sent him back late, I think. And people were like, oh, who's this Felino guy? It comes full circle. It's like, another one of those guys is he made it work here and has found a home and found his role and embraced it and become a really good leader and a great player on this team.
And let's get back to the trade talk essentially. So we spoke about Kevin Fiala. Let's talk about the Kulikov trade and the Cam Talbot trade. So what are your thoughts on what happened with Kulikov? Because I know a lot of people said, he wasn't as bad as what people, thought he was, but he fell victim to a trend that essentially has been happening during this offseason, which is a lot of players are being traded for literally absolutely nothing just because they're desperate to create cap space.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really solid year for us last year, I thought. When we were healthy, anchoring that third pair with John Merrill, those two are really good together. His underlying numbers, expected goals against numbers were great. I believe he had a career year in both goals and assists as well from the blue line. But he was very bad in the playoffs. Pretty terrible game one, which, the Wild didn't score in that game one against St. Louis, but had some turnovers that led directly to goals. Early in the game, when the Wild had all the momentum. Gets benched for games 2, 3, and 4. Comes back in game 5. High stick Joel Eric's neck in the mouth, takes him out of the game. Has more turnovers late in the game that lead to goals. And I don't. Those are the big games of the year, right? And those are the ones that people remember. And I think that's where a lot of the hate comes from. And it's still sour in our mouths as well. But to say he didn't have a good regular season would not be fair to him at all. But I think kind of beyond the play, the bigger reason this move had to happen is there's a guy in Kayla Addison who, depending on where you look, is looked as one of the Wild's highest prospects. He's a guy Bill Guerin went out and traded for as soon as he got to Minnesota, sending Zucker to Pittsburgh. This is a guy that needs a chance. He's pretty much done what he can do in the AHL. The cups of coffee he's got in the NHL, he's looked good. One of the Wild's biggest weaknesses last year was their power play. This is a guy that has the ability to quarterback a power play to distribute pucks up high on whether it's a first unit or second unit. And it's a guy that needs to get a chance to be in the lineup. And with the extensions to John Merrill and Alex Goligoski, Kulikov kind of becomes the odd man out in that situation because you can't have Kayla Addison as your number 8 defenseman. And with Merrill starting the year injured as well, Kayla Addison's going to get his shot to probably play on the third line, get some power play time, and kind of prove that he needs to be on this team. So. And on top of that, cap space is an asset. So granted, they trade him for future considerations, but they also now have an additional $2.25 million in cap space that they can use now, that they can wait and use at the deadline. I think they now have if you include Rossi and Addison's contracts and the cap hit, I think they have about $4.5 million in cap space to play around with here into the year, which is huge. So, yeah.
Yeah, and looking at their defensive pairings, you have Brodin with Dumba, Middleton, who they brought at the deadline, Jared Spurgeon, Alex Goligoski, and potentially having Addison being added to that list. I think Merrill is going to be a healthy scratch. I think they're going to really give a lot of opportunities for Addison to grow as a player, see what's going to happen to him, because like we've been talking about for many years, the Dumba situation. Will he get traded or will he not get traded? And I think, a comment right here, I think the Dumba situation is the elephant in the room. It kind of died out and no one just spoke about it, but there was a lot of smoke surrounding whether or not Dumba would have got traded. And we'd like to get your thoughts on what happened. Why did it calm down essentially?
He just has $6 million in cap hit, and I just think, I think right now there's 17 teams that are already over the cap hit, and they just can't afford to bring a player like that on. And on top of that, Dumba's missed, I think, between 20 and 30 games each of the last 2 years. He hasn't been healthy, and it's hard for a team to give up assets to take on not only $6 million in actual money, even if the Wild retain money on that, down to $4 million. It's hard to bet on a guy that's going to miss a third of the season. When he's in the lineup, he's a solid player. I think on any team, Matt Dumba's a top 4 defenseman. I don't believe there's a lack of talent there. It's just, I think the contract is hard for people to stomach. And when you combine that with the injury history as well, it's tough, right? And what the reports have been locally here in Minnesota is this has been a guy that they've had on the block for the last 3 years. They just haven't really found, teams that are willing to take him on, and the ones that are, they haven't gotten a value that they think is fair. I don't think this is a guy they want to trade like a Kulikov where they give him up for nothing. Because like I said, when he's in the lineup, he's still a valuable piece. He's a leader on this team. He's a excellent member of this community in the terms of the work he's done in the city of Minneapolis after George Floyd, his involvement with the Hockey Diversity Alliance. That stuff can't be overstated either. he's a great human being as well as being still being a really good hockey player. So I think that will be, I think, one of the biggest storylines coming into this year will be what happens next with Dumba. I think he could become like a Fiala situation where he is the Wild's own rental at the deadline if they're in a position where maybe Keelan Addison takes that big step forward and John Merrill and Alex Goligoski have continued to play well. Maybe he's a guy they feel comfortable moving at the deadline. Is he a guy maybe they bring back on a contract extension? Does he take a hit out of his cap and say, hey, yeah, I'll resign at $4 million a year? Or does he's a guy that just walks to free agency, right? There's tons of options, and I think it really just depends on how things play out this year with the rest of the blue line, with prospect development, with how the team is playing. I think to say what'll happen right now is just too hard because we don't know what we don't know yet. It really depends on how this season goes. But I have nothing but good things to say about Matt Dumba. I think he's given everything to the Wild. It's just unfortunate that he hasn't been able to stay healthy.
Would you say a potential hockey trade maybe?
Again, it's hard just because they've tried that and just haven't found a suitor yet. So I think if he can stay healthy this year and be a valuable asset and to the point where the Wild could get something from him, I think they would explore that. At the deadline, again, especially too if Addison steps up and proves he's ready to assume a bigger role. But it takes two teams to tango, and I think that they still need to find that right fit still with another team before they can try to do that. But I think that would probably be the goal.
And the other trade, which is the last trade we're going to be talking about, Cam Talbot. We all know that there was kind of friction once Marc-Andre Fleury was added to this team. I know Chris was not a fan of Kaapo Kähkönen being traded for Jacob Middleton 1-for-1. The thing is that I understood in terms of what they did because, you have Wallstedt coming up in a couple of years, right? So by the time Fleury's contract ends in 2 years, he's going to be ready. So you can have Gustafsson and Wallstedt as a dynamic duo, essentially. So, and they had to clear cap space, right? So Kapanen, I understand why they got him. They improved their defense by doing so because they had someone that was better in their system that was coming up, and obviously his ceiling's a lot higher than Talbot having two basically number one goalies, sharing the net. Like you're gonna have the same Vegas problem between Leonard and Fleury. They don't want that again, right? So now you have Gustafsson, who is younger, cheaper, and he's not gonna surpass Fleury unless maybe there's an injury or something. So I think in terms of what Minnesota did overall with their whole goalie situation, I think did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I mean it was a weird carousel there for a little bit. There was times last year where the Wild fans were clamoring for Kaapo Kähkönen to get in there and get reps because Cam Talbot just wasn't delivering. But it was so much up and down from both of them. There would be stretches where both of them looked like legitimate, like Vezina caliber goaltenders. And then there was a stretch there through, I think it was through the end of February into kind of early March where the goalies couldn't stop a beach ball. And eventually it kind of triggered that trade to go bring in Fleury because they needed stability. They had one of the most high-powered offenses in the league, but they were still losing games 6-5 because their goaltenders couldn't stop easy pucks. And so Fleury was brought in to challenge Cam Talbot, say, hey, we brought another guy in that can come for your job. And Talbot delivered, I think, finished his last 17 games of the year at 15-0-2. In that stretch, didn't lose a game in regulation. Once Fleury was brought in, I think that might have been a little overlap too before he was brought in as well. Fleury comes in, I think, goes 9-2-0 in his 11 starts here. And they battled, and I think, one thing that I'm always going to look back on is, should Cam Talbot have started the playoffs or at least come in game 2? I think that's something that the coaching staff and the GM probably regret not doing. It could have changed the tide of that playoff series for him, but decisions were made. And then, if after they extend Fleury, Talbot's obviously upset. His wife took to social media to express her, some of her frustrations as well. And the media caught wind of it and things got messy. And, we talked a lot about culture and, Bill Guerin kind of said indirectly, but it's like, if you don't want to be here, that's fine. I'll send you somewhere else. And in my mind, is Filip Gustavsson Cam Talbot? No. But if you look at kind of their underlying numbers from last year, they're actually pretty similar overall. As you mentioned, Gustafsson's a younger goalie. Cam Talbot's only getting older. And again, we got that cap space, which for this team is a luxury. It's something that we need, allows us to go out and make moves and have flexibility in that sense too. So, I think the biggest thing that will come out of this is, how much of a workload can Fleury handle? We hope it's 50 games probably, and that Gustafsson come in for those other 30, 25, 30 games and be solid. But, I'm excited to see what he can do. Again, we talked about earlier, and all these forwards and defensemen that have gotten chances in Minnesota and have proved it. The Wild have a great defense. They have a great blue line. They have forwards who know how to play the right way in the defensive zone. And I think, a goalie like Gustavsson, who's coming from Ottawa, who maybe doesn't quite have that structure, maybe that's the boost he needs too, right? So we'll see how it plays out. But I think overall, I'm not too upset with how things played out. I think they still have 2 NHL goalies on the roster. And is it, maybe the tandem of Talbot Fleury probably better? Yeah, but it also is about $3 million more expensive. And you can't ignore the rift that existed there from kind of the time he was brought in till the time they traded him away.
When you think about the Minnesota Wild, at least in my mind, I just think about one word, and that is underrated. When it comes to management and when it comes to the team that's playing on the ice, I think they're a very overlooked team. And we met Bill Guerin, fortunate for us, at the draft in Montreal. A really nice guy, and we're really happy that he's having a successful tenure with the Minnesota Wild. But he's taking the team to limits where the Minnesota Wild have never gone before. Sure, they have had superstars like Marian Gaborik on the team, but that was a one superstar player on a pretty mediocre to bad team. Now Bill Guerin's building a fantastic team all around in every department: defense, goaltending, and offense. It's competitive now, but even with the prospects coming up, they're slated to be future NHL players. So I think they're doing a fantastic job in terms of that. But there's one thing that I do think they're lacking, and I've spoken about this many times with a lot of people, is they need a bona fide first line center, and I don't think Ryan Hartman is that.
Yeah, I don't think he's your prototypical one. I think he's proven he's a top 6 center at a minimum. I don't know what more you could ask out of a top line center than 30 goals, 65 points, and an expected goal share above 50%. Maybe a little bit more on the faceoffs, that kind of thing, but that's an area the whole team struggles. Not something that's Hartman's fault. But yeah, that's pretty much been a need this team has had since the dawn of time. The Wild have never really had that true number 1 center. I think there was a stretch there from the early 2010s to the mid 2010s. Mikko Koivu was arguably the second best defensive center in the NHL behind Patrice Bergeron. But that was before we really had the analytics to prove it. But we can look back now and know that he was really freaking good. And this market hated it because he didn't put up points, but that wasn't what he was. He was more of a two-way guy. But yeah, it's something they've always lacked. And what's the hardest thing to acquire? They were in on Eichel for a while. They've kicked tires on good centers, but they just haven't found the fit yet. They've drafted guys like Marco Rossi, who they're maybe hoping can turn into that guy, but it's not going to be in year 1, might not be in year 2, and probably not going to be in year 3. But the way they've constructed this team, we saw it last year with Hartman between Zuccarello and Kaprizov, and with Gaudreau between Fiala and Baldi. And it's that they want these centers just to complement these wingers. They're going to drive the play through the wingers, which was a little bit more of the old school style from back in the day, where the play goes through the wingers, and it's worked. Could a number 1 center come in and help this team right now? Yes, but I think you have to look at what does that cost you elsewhere. It probably costs you a blue liner like a Matt Dumba. It probably costs you depth on your 4th and 3rd lines. So that's all things you have to consider. And one of the strengths of this Wild team is how deep they are from top to bottom. And the way this team's constructed right now, to bring in a number 1 center, you're gonna have to get weaker somewhere else, and it's the opportunity cost there that you have to weigh.
And also the cap space, not necessarily the most available thing to be used right now for the Wild. The 5. Well, you could get I don't know if you could get a good first line center for $5 million.
When looking at the trade market, let's say we're in the 2023 trade deadline. At the time, JT Miller was not signed at one point, so I was thinking maybe JT Miller, maybe Bo Horvat, because they're both top quality centermen that are going to be UFAs at the end of the season. JT Miller gets his huge extension, but Bo Horvat is still not signed to an extension. So maybe there's a possibility. Obviously, you would have to give up more than just Dumba, but the Wild have the prospects to do it. And something that Vancouver lacks is defense. They need to improve their defense. They need to build around Quinn Hughes. Their offense is fine. I think it's perfect the way it is. I think it's probably one of the most underrated offensive structures they have currently, if everything goes according to plan this upcoming season. So do you think that's maybe a possibility?
It's hard. They're probably going to be in on every center that becomes available. Because everyone knows they need the center help, but the way it is right now, they already have 13 forwards. They like the prospect pool. They don't like to trade their picks. So I think it has to be a really good offer. They have to be in a situation where, if they do bring someone in an expiring contract, they have to know that player's going to come back. The cap crunch gets tighter following this year, I think by another $2 million or so. And it's going to be tricky to navigate things like that. There's so much they have to weigh, so many moving parts that are going to be in play there. Will they try it? Maybe, but those type of in-season trades just are kind of unheard of. But you never know with Bill Guerin. We've shown he likes to take the big swings and suffer the consequence if they come his way. But I wouldn't rule it out. But it's not something I'm watching probably intently, waiting for it to happen.
And I would say the funnest part of this episode is always talking about who's going to be the breakout star for the team that we cover. And we reached that point in the episode now where we're able to talk about that. So I mean, in terms of who I think is going to be the Minnesota Wild's breakout star, I think it's pretty obvious. Matt Baldi, not playing a full season with the Wild, only playing 47 games, 15 goals, 24 assists for a total of 39 points. Like, put him in a situation where he's going to be playing a full season. I think it's possible he could replace Kevin Fiala's level of production. Maybe not 85 points, but a good 60 points to maybe 65 point season.
Yeah, I mean, the way he came in January last year and stepped into that line with Fiala and Gaudreau and instantly elevated those two to, like, he elevated Kevin Fiala to a superstar, and made it, probably made that decision to, can we trade Kevin Fiala, a lot harder than probably it was before he came in. But I love Matt Boldy. He's probably my favorite Wild player right now. The next jersey that I'm buying will be a Matt Boldy jersey once the reverse retros are released. But I mean, he does you watch him play, and I think it's easy to forget that he's only 21 years old. His hockey IQ is off the charts with the way he's able to. I think a big trend you'll see in young players is they'll get in the zone, they'll get pressure, they'll dump the puck. Matt Boldy doesn't do that. He looks to peel away from pressure. He looks to find open guys. He looks to create space. He's big. He's physical. He plays hard. He doesn't back down from challenges. It's amazing just watching some of the subtle plays that he makes as a 21-year-old. Now he wasn't even 21 until I think about halfway through his time last year. So, and they're going to need him to step up. As you mentioned, like Kevin Fiala, that's 85 points that are walking out the door. And Marco Rossi is not going to come in and do that, but Matt Boldy was on pace. I believe if he had played a full 82 game season on a points per game basis, I believe would have beat Kirill Kaprizov's Calder season that he had. He probably would have won the Calder Trophy if he would have played a full season last year. Like, he was that good. People just didn't realize it because he didn't play until the middle of January. But I have huge expectations for him. I think he's ready for it. He's just so mature in the way that he plays. And again, I think the big key is getting him in a situation, setting him up for success, getting him with a skilled player like Marco Rossi, hopefully putting maybe whether it's a Tyson Jaws or a Sam Steele, someone offensively inclined, if they can feed off each other. Top power play time, I think, isn't necessary for him too, unless they want to kind of split the wealth and get two solid units. But we need a big year for him, and I think he's going to be a huge part of our future. And I think from his standpoint too, is he knows the cap situation that a bridge deal is probably coming his way. But the better he plays, the more that bridge deal is going to be worth, and eventually that the big contract that'll come his way, probably at the end of these buyouts, has to be on the horizon and in the back of his mind too. So motivation for both him and the team to play well.
And Chris, I'm guessing your breakout star is Tyson Jaws.
Well, I mean, Tyson Jaws for a bounce back year, but I was gonna go with Jordan Greenway. I think the most points he's ever had in his career. Sorry, not the most points he's ever had in his career. Sorry, but I mean the only time he's played a full season has been in 2018, 2019 with 24 points, and 2021. 2020, 2021, and 21, 22, he played only about like 60 games and, almost like peaked 40 points. I feel like, I don't know how many games he's going to be missing at the start of the season, but, I feel like he's a 50-point player if he plays a full season. So I think he's going to have a career year if he doesn't get injured. I'm going to go with him, but or else the consensus is probably Boldy. I mean, listen, I think he's going to be a superstar. So,
Yeah.
And they did sign Greenway to an extension. So, I mean,
a cheap one too. Pretty good.
So they're gonna expect him to like step up as well. Like Brett was saying, Kevin Fiala's loss is not, oh whatever, he's replaceable. Like, you're gonna have to like push every single one of those players to replace that level of production. 85 points in a season is not easy to do. And in terms of their overall team, I think Minnesota, this is how they've had the most balanced team they've ever had in years. Kaprizov 108, Fiala 85, Zuccarello 79, Hartman 65, Eriksson Ek 49, Goudreau 44, Felino 42, Spurgeon 40. Like they had the luxury where everything was just going right that year. And that leads us to our next question: can this magic be repeated or be even better next season and increase their hopes, maybe going further in the playoffs? Because I do believe they will be a top 3 team in their division. They are a playoff team in my eyes. It's just that, are they able to take the next step?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to bet on all those guys repeating career years. Like, is there regression coming? Yes, but is it going to be like a fall off a cliff? No, I don't think so. If all those guys maybe score 5 to 8 points less, would that surprise anyone? Probably not. Kevin Fiala missing from Matt Bowley, like that's going to hurt. Kevin Fiala's a good player, and Matt Bowley and him fed off one another. That's going to hurt there, right? But it's going to be another year of Kaprizov. Could he push for even more points? I think he could. I think he could be a 50 goal scorer next year. I think a big area this team's going to focus on is probably actually trying to get scored on less, tightening up defensively, implementing some new systems, trying to build chemistry on that blue line. I think a full year of Middleton and Spurgeon is going to help a lot too. Spurgeon had, kind of a rotating cast of partners last year, starting off with Goligoski, that not working. There was injuries with the scramble pairing, and Kulikov was playing up with Brodin. I think Brodin and Spurgeon played together for periods of time. So I think being able to establish some chemistry on that blue line will help too, in terms of limiting goals against. And maybe you don't need those guys to be better offensively. You need to be better defensively. And that's, something that team has a history of being good at. And I wouldn't put past them either. And I think, especially in games where Gustafsson's in there, a younger goalie who maybe aren't quite as confident as you are Fleury's back there. Maybe need to tighten up in that sense too. But, on top of that too, I don't think, the Western Conference, I don't really think got a whole lot better this year. Like, it seems every superstar that played in the West last year, sounds like Nazem Kadri seemed to went to the East. And especially within the Central Division, like none of these teams really got better. Colorado lost Kadri. St. Louis lost players. Dallas didn't really get any better. They're only getting older. They have guys like Robertson and Hintz that are, okay, and up and coming players. But, the division doesn't really scare me by any means. I don't think they got better. And the Wild, basically lost Kevin Fiala, Cam Talbot, and they've replaced him with Sam Steele, Marco Rossi, and Filip Gustavsson, which is, to me, maybe it's a minor step back, but not one where it takes him from the 5th best team in the league, 2nd best team in the division, to a not even a playoff team.
Yeah, the West as a whole is not what the West once was. The West was essentially a lot stronger than the East, and now it seems like the script has been flipped. And you look at the West as a whole, there's going to be a lot of non-playoff teams from the West, and essentially, I mean, not a non-playoff teams, but it's going to be a lot easier to distinguish who's going to make the playoffs and who's going to miss the playoffs. But in terms of trying to predict who's going to be the Stanley Cup favorite or who's going to go on a playoff run, I mean, you're going to choose most likely teams in the East as opposed to the West.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
like the West feels like Colorado, and then it feels like 10 teams that are all like the same.
That's what everyone's saying, essentially. But, it is what it is, and it's up to, the West now to prove people wrong. So we'll see
absolutely
what happens there. And we'll take some questions in the comment section. We have our co-host who couldn't show up today, unfortunately. So he's asking you in terms of Kayla, Addison, and Matt Baldi's production this year. Will they have a huge impact, or will they kind of be secondary players, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already kind of hit on the Baldi piece. Like, they need him to be good. He's going to get every opportunity. I think he's a guy that if there's an injury to someone like a Zuccarello or Kaprizov, he's going to be kind of probably the next name up. In my mind, he's probably the 2nd or 3rd best forward on this roster right now. Probably Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and then I'd probably put Baldi there, even above like a Zuccarello, just with everything that he brings on a nightly basis. So he needs to be good. And then, Addison, I just think it really depends on, he's going to get that opportunity to start the year. But when Merrill comes back, he's going to be in competition for that third pairing, with Goligoski, with Merrill. So I think it's going to really be on him to make as big as impact as he wants to make. I know there's internal concerns about having a right side of Spurgeon, Dumba, and Addison. All 3 right-handed shots are all under 5 foot. Not the biggest guys, but we've seen it work for teams like Colorado, where mobility and skill can win out over size sometimes. So it's going to be on him to play big, to play smart, to improve his defensive game, to show value on the power play. to mature into a good NHL player. Discipline is going to be a big thing. That's something we should go with in Iowa. Retaliatory penalties, undisciplined penalties, untimely penalties. So cleaning that up. But still a young player that we have really high hopes for. I mean, if it were up to me, he'd be a full-time player this year. He wouldn't see Iowa again. But I'm not the coach or the GM, so I'm not going to make that decision. But, the trading of Kulikov to him should be a sign that there's some belief in this kid, and that he needs to prove that, that they didn't make a mistake in trading away a good NHL defenseman to make room for him to get a chance.
And follow-up question by our co-host: How long is Jesper Wallstedt for making the NHL?
Yeah, it's a hard question for me to answer. I'm by no means a goalie scout, and I think projecting, goalies is one of the hardest things to do, even among professional scouts. But I mean, if you look at the way he's handled already a league playing against men already in his young career in Sweden, he was one of the best goalies in Sweden last year. He was an absolute dominating force at the World Juniors in August here. If the team in front of him was at all competent and could have, generated some sort of offense at any point during that tournament, they probably would have had a shot at the gold because he was that good. He's going to be in Iowa this year. He's going to be able to tandem with Zane McIntyre, who's a pretty well established AHL goaltender. So he's going to get every chance to be good. I think our hope is that by the time these buyouts are up, that he can be ready. The contracts with Gustavsson and Fleury are built in a way where if he really shows out this year, he could be in the lineup next year as maybe a backup or a 1B. But it's hard to predict. If I had to take a best guess, I'd say he's probably 2 to 3 years out. Because the big thing for me is we don't want to rush him, right? You don't want to put him in a situation where he's falling on his face. They're calling him up when he's not ready. So I think, a lot like they've done with Baldi and waiting, till January last year with Rossi, giving him a full year in the AHL. They're not going to rush these guys if they don't have to.
What we saw Wallstedt, what he was capable of doing at the World Juniors was ridiculous. That guy was a brick wall. So, I mean, I think he's going to be ready a lot sooner than people think, but he has to be ready by the time Fleury retires in 2 years. Like, he has to. They have no choice because they have a lot of hope and expectations with him coming up. And especially the moment they drafted him, they knew that this guy was going to be their potential first starting goaltender, essentially. So, I mean, it has to work out because if it doesn't, then things are not going to look too great in goaltending.
Shout out Edmonton for gifting us Jesper Wallstedt. And
it feels like Edmonton gives a lot of things away for free.
Yeah, like Taylor Hall.
Yeah. So next question: Will one of Liam Ogren or Danila Yurov play in the NHL, or what are their projections in your guys' opinion?
Yeah, I mean, they're both going to be NHLers. I think it's more of a timeline. To me, Yurov's probably the more NHL ready of the two, but you have the wrinkle of he plays in Russia. He's on the last year of his contract over there this year with Magneto Gorsk. I think so far to start the year has been playing on their third line, but has been very impactful in the games that he's been in there. I think the Wild's perfect situation. They can get him over here sooner than later. As I kind of mentioned off the beginning of the show, bringing another Russian, a skilled player to play with Kaprizov is never a bad thing. Kaprizov reached out to him right away after he was drafted and said, congratulations. There's a little bit of chemistry there already. I think it's a guy that, I think if everything goes well, I would hope he'd be up here in about 3 years. I think potentially kind of overtaking that Matt Zuccarello spot opposite the wing of Kaprizov, because I think the way Yurov plays in terms of his two-way game, in terms of his ability as a puck distributor, is the exact perfect complement to someone like Kaprizov. I don't know. My lights keep turning off. But it's someone we have really high hopes for. He was on top of our podcast list of players we'd hope would fall to the Wild at originally picked 19 and he got all the way to 24. So we're hyped, but Ogren, I think, is the type of guy that just fits the Wild system. He's a goal scorer at heart, but also a guy that, can play physical. I think could play with a bunch of different combinations. I think he'd be great alongside Matt Bowley down the road. They have Marat Huzendinov in the pipeline as well. I think it's a guy that could complement him potentially very well. But these are guys I do project to be in this lineup, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I think it really depends in Yurov's case, how long he stays in Russia. And then in Ogren's case, he pretty much hit everything he could at the J20 level last year. So now we'll look to this year too. I believe they were relegated out of the SHL to Allsvenskan. So hopefully being a big contributor on that team. And I would assume he'll probably play this year and then come over to Iowa So his timeline could be closer to kind of that 3-year timeline. Could be here sooner than Yurov, but more so out of the ability to get him here versus Yurov, who again is just that contract situation, the political climate in Russia. You just never know.
Yeah, and I do think both these players will be, impactful players on the Minnesota Wild for years to come. It all comes down to, how long is it going to take in terms of their development. But they're both wingers. They got rid of Kevin Fiala, and if I highly doubt that these guys are not going to pan out to be, I would say, at least 60-point players. So if you want to replace that production that Fiala left behind, sure, you have Matt Baldi, but in the future you also have Ogren and Yurov who could replace that as well. So what I like about Guerin is just that he's constantly covering his ground. Every single time there's maybe a little hole, he patches it up, but not necessarily something that maybe help them presently, but something that's going to help them down the line, and I like that. And our last comment here, which is concerning Adam Beckman.
Yeah, I think he's a player I'll be really fascinated to kind of see what kind of role he gets this year, whether it's with the Wild to start the year or in Iowa. So he kind of got this weird treatment last year where in Iowa he was kind of put on this third line with kind of, I think it was Cody McLeod and another like minor leaguer who's like, they were literally like their roles were enforcers. Like they would fight guys and hit guys, like really had no offensive upside. And Beckman, of course, a WHL player of the year his last year in the WHL. Tons of skill offensively. He had a really, really good training camp last year for the Wild, like to the point where he almost made the team. But I think the tricky part is this is a guy that's more of an offensive guy. He's not a defensive guy. So if he needs to carve out a role for himself offensively, and right now there's a logjam of guys with Tyson Jaws in the mix, with now Sam Steele in the mix, with Marco Rossi being ready for the NHL. Like as it stands right now, is there probably a spot for him? No. So in my mind, to me, it's if he gets that shot to start the year with the couple injuries that they have, is to take advantage of that, be great. And then when Greenway comes back, maybe accepting, hey, I'm going to go back to Iowa and I'm going to be a guy they lean on down there, hopefully as a top line, second line guy, a big power play contributor. I think this is a guy they want, but again, I think much like Rossi, much like Bowley, not a guy they want to rush. But the organization has shown a lot of belief in him this year during their prospect tournament following the draft. He was named one of the captains of the two prospect teams. The team has marketed him quite a bit as well, both at the AHL level and the NHL level. So I think it's a kid they believe in. I just think it's a kid. And I think we knew this from the start. He's going to be a little bit more of a project. There's a lot of areas of his games that were very raw. So continue to round him out. The shot is there. And I think the work ethic is there, but I think rounding out the defense, the discipline, all that stuff is going to be huge for him. And I think, within the Minnesota podcast circle, the analysts, the community, I think he's a guy we're looking to take a big step forward this year, whether that's in Iowa or in Minnesota, whether it's filling in for injuries or, potentially making a team out of camp. Because Bill Guerin's one thing he's been big on is even if he brings in, the Sam Steeles, the Tyson Jaws of the world, you have to earn your spot. And if Adam Beckman comes out and lights camp on fire and earns his spot, they won't hesitate to play him. So,
and very quickly before we end today's episode, where does Rossi fit in this lineup, and how many points does he finish with this season?
Yeah, like I said, I think he'll start the year with Matt Baldi for sure. Who ends up on the other wing? If I had to bet, I think it'd be Freddie Gaudreau because Dean Evason just loves the guy and he adds stability in the two-way game. Again, if it were me, it'd be Tyson Jost opposite his wing, at least to start the year. I think he'll get opportunity on the power play. I think he'll see opportunity on the penalty kill. I think he'll see opportunity to win big draws for this team as they need help in the faceoff dot. That's been an area of strength throughout his whole career. And if things really start to go well for him and he really flashes, as I mentioned, if they do look to scramble lines, I could see him alongside Kaprizov at some point or in situations, late in games potentially. We're really excited about Rossi. We wish he would have played last year, but the contract slide that we got by not having him play his 10 games last year is huge in terms of cap management and not having to get that bridge deal until the buyouts are over. I think the sky's the limit for him. It's kind of what he makes out of it. He's not, I don't think he's, like I said, I don't think he's going to get the number one center role off the bat. But it's a role I could see him, getting into, whether that's, later in this year or into next year. But we just want Marco Rossi to go out there and just do what he does. And that's work his butt off and be great. And I think he will, and he'll be a full-time player, I think, in my mind. It's just a matter of, how much of that can he take and run with it. I would still put him probably as a Calder contender if everything goes right.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he will be playing majority of the season as a third line center. It's you never want to rush a kid like this with
Mhm.
this much talent, because then if things don't pan out, his confidence is going to be broken. So you don't want that to happen. And I do think my range in terms of how many points you get, even though I know points is not everything, especially when it comes to being a centerman. I see him having a 35 to 40 point season if all goes well.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah.
think that's fair.
And you, Chris?
Yeah, I was gonna say 40 points. I think that's fair expectation. I mean,
Okay.
he's gonna be starting off playing not too many minutes, so I mean, I would say 40 points. It's kind of reasonable.
You'll have to rise to the occasion to prove the management wrong in terms of like his usage, and she'd be like, this is a kid we need to play more often. And like you were saying, Brad, the ball's in his court essentially, and we'll see what happens. But with that being said, we'd like to thank you so much once again for coming on. We hope we did justice in terms of covering the Minnesota Wild. I hope
Absolutely.
the fan base is very satisfied with this video, as long as with all the other coverages we've done concerning season previews and off-season analysis that we've done. So we just wanted to say thank you so much on behalf of the Young Guns podcast. And is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I'm always down to talk Wild. So, appreciate you guys having me on and giving me the mic to talk about the team here and the expectations. And, it's crazy. We're, less than a month away from preseason games already. So it's an exciting time, and I'm ready for another exciting year and to continue to watch. I'm excited for a full year of Rossi and Bowley. We've been clamoring for this now as Wild fans for about 2-3 years now. So I'm excited.
Awesome. So good luck this season, and let's hope that this team is able to take it to the next level. And with that being said, guys, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our podcast, and share this with any Minnesota fan that may be interested in watching the season preview / off-season analysis. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.